Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Our guest today is an award winning author, podcaster, voice actor, holds multiple degrees. His science fiction series, The Golden Age of the Solar Clipper, is loved by many. He has written sci fi, fantasy, steampunk, urban fantasy. The list is endless. Please welcome Nathan Lowell to Epic Realms. Welcome, Nathan. Thanks for
Thank you
joining us.
very
I
much.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Your website lists this long list of degrees. Was education something that was always a big part of your life growing up?
No, well, being educated certainly was, but participating it as a professional, no, no, it was something I came in too late in life. Actually, I've had five or six, depending on how you count them, careers in different fields. So, yeah, education was sort of like I fell into it rather than chose it.
Yeah.
Just sort of happened.
Did you enjoy school as a kid growing up, or was it one of those I want to be out in the world enjoying other things or doing other things?
No, school is good. I like school. I had school is where the books were,
Yeah.
so I could go to I could read, and reading has always been a big part of my life. So science fiction in particular, fantasy. Uh, yeah, growing up was good. I graduated from high school in 1970, and that was right in the heat of the Vietnam War. So
Yeah.
I didn't go to college right out of high school. I didn't really start until after I got out of the service, and then didn't actually get a bachelor's degree until I was 40.
Okay.
So yeah, school was sort of like catch as catch can as long as I could, and then sort of fell into educational technology when we moved out here to Colorado.
Okay. Did you enjoy writing growing up, or when you were in the military? Did you get much time to do writing?
Oh yeah, I got time, but I never did anything with it. I
Yeah.
was, it's like it's one of those you always wanted to, but never could really because the technology wasn't there. The stories that I wanted to tell were not the stories that people wanted to buy to try to sell to bookstores, and I I didn't I didn't write the things that publishers wanted,
Yeah.
and so it's like about once a decade I would try and fail, and then go back to whatever it was I was doing, and then try again 10 years later. And it was oddly, it was my day job that got me into audiobooks, which got me into podcasting, which really set the stage for what I was have been able to do since.
What do you think were some of the big barriers when you were coming through? And like, because you said you were submitting things and getting turned down. Was it just that that's not what they were looking for, or was it just the
Yeah,
the the
well,
the
well
world at large, the way the world was working at the time?
the biggest problem was that I didn't know how to tell a story.
Okay.
Uh, I started, I don't know, a dozen novels, and I never finished them. I'd get halfway through, or I get 2 weeks into it and throw up my hands in disgust and walk away. So I a lot of it was I just didn't know. I didn't have a story. I didn't have a real good story to tell,
Yeah.
and it took me a long time to find a story to tell. And what I did, it took. So
Did your process change over that time when you were, before when what something wasn't working? Did you eventually like change your process, like maybe go from an outline to a not outline or vice versa or anything like
yeah.
that?
No, I've always been a pantser. I have a hard time with outlines. If I know what the ending is, then I sort of lose incentive to try to find it. Uh, it's like I write to find out what the ending is going to be, and so if I know what the ending is, then it's kind of mm, take it or leave it. The biggest change was the word processor,
Yeah.
because when I started, everything was on the typewriter.
Right. So editing
Uh,
wasn't super easy.
Editing was not super easy. Editing meant, okay, take this pile of paper and type it again.
Oh yeah.
So that was always a struggle. It was a long time before I got to the point where word processing made a difference. So Now my process is pretty much the same as it's been since I started being serious about it in 2007.
Yeah.
And it's mostly I have a character, I have a setting, I have an idea of what just happened, and I write what happens next. And as long as I can keep writing what happens next, the story keeps going. And then eventually I write off the end of and go off the cliff at the end, and it's like, oh yeah, that was the last sentence.
Do you ever have a problem where you're like, I think I'm going to be done, in this next chapter, and then you realize, nope, I've got like 3 more chapters to go?
Oh yeah.
How do
Oh
you?
yeah, happens. That happens all the time. And the opposite happens. I think I've got 2 chapters to go and I write the last line. I sit down and think, okay, it's probably going to be another week before I get to the end of this thing. And then 15 minutes later, I've written the last chapter.
Do you ever find a problem? It's like, well, I've got to meet a certain quota for whatever purpose, and then I got to insert or
No,
no.
yeah. One of the advantages of self-publishing is that I never worry about what my publisher is going to do with the book. My publisher is always going to accept my next novel,
Right.
and I don't have to worry about, it has to be, between 100 and 120,000 words. It has to be between 90 and 125,000 words. No, that's bullshit. The one problem I had a book that was 225,000 words long, and that was a problem because I couldn't, without shrinking the font size down below readability, I couldn't get it printed in the number of pages that was the maximum for what at the time was CreateSpace, but is now KDP.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get the print on demand short enough in pages to be able to get that number of words out without shrinking the font size down to a level where I would have had trouble reading it.
Oh man. So what'd you end up doing with that?
I dropped out 35,000 words.
Oh, I thought maybe you were going to say that you split it into 2 or something.
Yeah, no, I bit the bullet and went back through. That was the only one that I had problems with length over. My sweet spot's 100K. So
Okay.
when I sit down to write, I sit down to write a 100,000 word novel. And if I get 90, great. If I get 120, fine. If I get 150, cool. If I go over 175, then I start thinking, is this really the story I want to tell? Because I don't really want to have that heartburn in terms of trying to get it put into paper. So my lazy factor kicks in and says, nah, this is out of line. But that said, the 3 books that I've got coming up this year, I hope, I wrote them all in a line. I didn't know where one ended and the other began until I got to the very last page of the very last book and realized that the 370,000 words that I'd written was actually 3 books and not one. And I went through and found where the breakpoints were.
Okay.
I've been putting them together ever since.
Nice. You talked a little bit about the difficulties, early on trying to get going and get started. And you mentioned that in about 2007, you discovered podcasting and audiobooks and stuff like that. You want to tell us a little bit about like how you came into that genre of stuff and kind of how that helped you?
Well, my day job at the time was the technologies director for the National Center on Severe and Sensory Disabilities. And my job was helping universities and colleges that had master's degree programs in special education.
Okay.
And the problem is that this very specialized blindness, visual impairment, deafness, hard of hearing, significant support needs, those master's programs across the country were folding up because they all had residential requirements, and there weren't enough people in state to support their programs. So they were all closing. And that was a big problem in the field. And so my job is to try to figure out how to offer those programs online.
Okay.
And one of the challenges was that a lot of our teachers, a lot of our students were in rural areas where there was not any kind of broadband. They were all on dial-up. Some of them were on 300 baud, which, if that's probably Greek to a lot of people at this point, but that was pretty common.
Yeah.
So how do we get high bandwidth content? What we think of now today is pretty common. How do we get that to people who can't even load a web page in a reasonable amount of time?
Right.
And so one of the things that occurred to me when I started listening to Adam and the rest of the guys who started out podcasting at the end of 2004, I thought, well, here is a way for me to get high bandwidth content over a low bandwidth tube
Right.
by offsetting it so that the student's lesson downloads while they're sleeping,
Yeah.
and then they can listen to it the next day or watch it the next day or read it the next day. And so I needed to know how podcasting worked. And by beginning of 2007, I thought, well, if I'm going to learn how to do it, then probably the best way to do it is do it.
Right.
And by then I had discovered audiobooks, and the audiobooks people were having a lot of fun. Audiobooks was people who wrote long form fiction would then create a podcast chapter by chapter or half hour by half hour, whatever.
Right.
And so they would release their novels as podcasts.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, that, and they were having a lot of fun. And I thought, having fun sounds like a really good idea.
Right.
I like to have fun. Fun is good. We like fun. So I thought, all right, well, if I'm going to learn how to podcast and I want to have fun, then writing a novel and podcasting it seems like that would teach me a lot about how podcasting works. And
right.
I was right, and it did. The kicker was, of course, I had to write a novel.
Yeah.
And so I think it's January 12th, 2007, I sat down and wrote the first line of the first book and put it together in about 10 days, revised it over the next week, and recorded it in the front seat of my car on a cheap iRiver IFP 799. Crappiest audio you ever heard in your life, but
right.
It took off and people loved it. And the next thing I knew, I had to write a sequel and then another. And then it just sort of got out of hand.
And here we are today.
And here we are today.
Did you have any practice? Did you have any practice doing like performing arts or voice work, or was it just like, I'm just going to read this as is and it's going to be good?
Well, no, not really. I had a lot of experience listening to a lot of podcasts because at that point I had listened to every one of the books that was available on audiobooks. And you know how they say, borrow or steal from people who do things right?
Yep.
The thing that I did was that I went through and found the things that I didn't like to make sure that I didn't do those.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good to copy the stuff that you like, but it's also good to say that doesn't work for me. I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I'm just going to say that doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So the way my books went together from the beginning was I knew I was going to have to read them. I learned a lot about how to put a sentence together so that when you read it, it actually sounded like the sentences you wanted and not something weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did 9 books, and then did a lot of work for some other people. I did the Cowrie Catchers series for Abby Hilton. I did a bunch of stuff for a bunch of people. Yeah, it was fun. I had a lot of fun, and I learned about podcasting, and I learned about storytelling, and I learned about social media.
Yeah.
I've been online since long before it was social media. So
long before Facebook or even AOL Instant Messenger.
BBS. I was online. I was online before the internet, really.
Yeah, that predates me, that's for sure.
I was on the internet before it was the web.
Wow. Did you find that reading it, because you mentioned that, it helped you like put a sentence together. Did you find that overall reading it out loud helped you with your writing in general, like telling stories and understanding like how things should go in order or any of that kind of stuff?
No. it helps it, it helps me understand how particularly dialogue should sound. It's really easy to hear bad dialogue and you go, oh yeah, but changing the story, no, changing how the story unfolds, no. uh, those don't have a lot of bearing on what they sound like. The story is the story, and the sound of the story never really came to bear for me for in that aspect. But knowing where to put the dialogue tags, a lot of you listen to people, and somebody, a narrator has this long involved statement from somebody who proclaims for 40-50 seconds at a time,
Yeah.
and then you get to she said, and it's like, wait a minute, who was it again?
Right.
And so you learn to put the dialogue tags early, you learn to put action tags early, you learn to not do things like he said, she said all the time.
Yeah.
It and and the challenge is then taking that same text and putting it on a page, because on a page you don't really have to worry about that too much. The lay on the way the text lays on the page tells the reader who's talking, but you have to make sure that that's there when you're going to do it in audio.
Yeah.
And so I think the audiobook narrators have a break from me because I write as if I was going to have to read it. And
Yeah.
so I'm pretty sure I know that they're going to be able to read it.
That was going to be my next question, is if you started to read it, to write it for podcasting or for audio, and you kind of answered that a little bit there, that that is kind of the case, as
Yeah,
far as structure.
well, the structure of the sentence, yeah, the structure of the story, no.
Right, right, for sure.
But yeah, yeah.
When you, because you said you had done some reading for some other people, right? Is that, did I
Mhm.
hear you right?
Yeah,
Did that become an issue at all, where you're like reading it and you're like, "Oh, this sentence just is weird or
no,
wrong"? And did you
no,
have,
no, no. I just did the sentence as it was given to me.
okay,
It would be, I often put emphasis in places where the original author didn't, which was a challenge for them to hear me interpret their words. But I never had anybody come back to me, and well, except for Abby Hill. Abby Hill, the Cowrie Catchers is a full cast audio, and
oh,
so
okay,
I only had one part to read. I only read the dialogue for my character. And so she would come back to me and say, "No, this is too flat. You got to give me more. You got to give me more. Yell some. Do something with this. This one is too flat. This one is too. This one is." And I had problems with a name, um, a common name to me, and a common name for her. But for me, the common name was Feral, Ferrell,
okay.
and for her, the common name was Pharrell,
Oh,
Ferrell.
yeah,
And so, we ran into that a couple of times until I trained myself to say the name the way she wanted and not the way that I heard it in my head.
yeah,
Uh, so that was always, it's always a challenge to work with another author, to work with another producer, to try to create their vision, to help them create the vision that they wanted.
yeah.
So that was good. But I read short stories. I did Alan Steele, Emperor of Mars. He won a Hugo for that story,
Oh, nice.
and I did the audio for it, and it was on Starship Sofa, and that was fun because he thanked Starship Sofa and me for doing the audio for the book. It was fun. It was a great book. It
That's
was a great.
cool.
It's not a book. It was I think it was a short story. It might have been a novelette or something, but it was
Yeah,
a short piece.
but a Hugo is nothing to sneeze at,
Yeah,
regardless.
well, I didn't get the Hugo. He
No,
did, but
but
that's
still,
fun.
yeah.
Yes, I read a Hugo winning
Hey, there you go.
a Hugo award winning story.
Did you what do you think of the evolution of podcasting and audiobooks from, 2007 to now, where it's like you get whole editing suites and you've got editors and directors and producers doing a lot of that stuff, and they're going in, they're remastering it, and they're doing sound editing, whereas before you said you did it in the front seat of your car and it was, you did it and it was done.
Yeah, I did it and it was done. It's it's one of those things. It's like it's gotten overly complex.
Hmm.
I talk to people all the time and say, "Well, you're going to do a podcast? When do you have time to do a podcast?" And it's like, well, I got 20 minutes. What do you want? What does it have to be? And the idea that it has to be this sort of highly produced, smooth, absolute sound. No, no. In the beginning, uh, the fact that it was just somebody talking to you was good enough.
Yeah.
For reading. Reading has a performance to it. So reading a novel is sort of, you sort of have to perform the novel. You can read it, or you can read it.
Yeah.
And so my goal was to always have to be the storyteller in their head and the storyteller in their ears, to tell them the story that was on the page in front of me. I think that's probably why the first books were all first person, so that I could do that.
Yeah.
And when I started, I said, well, okay, I channel my NPR announcer voice, and what would that sound like, and where does the inflection fall, and is there inflection, and how much do I want to try to do voices? And the answer was not very much.
Yeah.
But I'm still, I'm so old school at this point that I get upset when I hear a podcast doesn't have an RSS feed, and it's like, why don't you have an RSS feed? Well, you don't need one. It's like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do.
It's sort of the definition. It's sort of the definition of a podcast. It's anything that's delivered via RSS. It's sort of, that's whatever you want to call it. It's, if you're just downloading it, that's downloading it. If you're only doing it live, that's streaming.
Yep.
I mean, they're technical terms, they mean things. But the problem with podcasting, I think the problem that podcasting faces is the same things that fiction authors face, in terms of, do I go with a publisher who's going to do all of this extra work to polish and shine and make it fit their box, or am I going to self-publish and make a box that fits me?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of room for podcasting still, for the individual podcaster, for the little guy, for lack of
Yeah.
a better term,
Yeah.
or the little gal, for lack of a better term, for the person who says, all right, I'm going to sit down with a microphone and I'm going to do the thing. Or in my case, I'm going to go take a walk and do the thing.
Yeah.
And I don't see as a problem necessarily, other than the idea gets sort of inculcated that it takes a lot of equipment, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of this, it takes a lot of that, it takes a lot of, what it takes is an idea and a willingness to do it. If you got that, rock on.
Yeah.
But the problem is this perception that has grown up with, oh, we can't compete with NPR. All of the big names have got, all the news channels have their own podcasts. Everybody's got their own podcast, and it's all polished and it's all
Right.
spiffy. And I've got to do that too, or it's not really a podcast. And that's, there's a term for that, and the term is bullshit.
I fall a
When I
little
say
bit
it,
into that. I like to make sure that I edit it and I get, background sounds up. But other than that, I just leave it. Like most of the ums and ahs in a conversation, I leave a lot of those in there. Like if it's over, if it takes away from the story or takes away from the conversation, then yeah, I'll pull something out. But otherwise,
yeah,
yeah,
you got to do that sometimes. Yeah, but I mean, for the most part, it's like, yeah, no.
and I always
Uh,
tell people, I'm like, I'm not Adam Carolla. I'm not, and I never will be, and I don't think I ever want to be. But I
that's
still
the
have
thing. You don't want to be.
right.
It was when I started writing. It's like, I can't out Weber David Weber. I'm not going to write. I'm not going to write the science fiction that John Ringo writes. I'm not going to write the science fiction that David Weber writes, or any of them. I'm going to write the science fiction that I write, because I'm the only one who can write my science fiction. So why don't I write mine
Right.
and figure out what mine is going to be?
Well, and your stories are just, there's something just different. The pacing feels different. The story, way the stories are told is different. I tell people this, and I don't know if you might not agree or not, but I've been telling people that it reminds me, there's a movie called Lethal Weapon that came out in the 80s, and there's something different about it, that they have just real conversations, and you see just real life stuff in there, and like, you can't have the show without those pieces. Those characters would not be the same. And you look at it from the surf, and it's like, those, that doesn't need to be there, but when you really look at it, it needs to be there to tell the
It,
story.
it
And that's
needs to be
kind of
there
how I
because,
feel about your
yeah,
books. It's like, you see these, like, just somebody brewing a cup of coffee, like, yeah, brewing a cup of coffee isn't a big deal, but in the terms of understanding these characters that you make, or the way that you tell them, it definitely means something, and it changes the pace of it. And it's I'm sorry, but it's an amazing new different feel for me when I got a hold of one of your stories. It's like, this is completely different from everything else, and I love it.
thank you. Thank
um
you.
how did that come to you? Was it just something that just happened, or was it something you intentionally went out to do?
Oh no, it was intentional. It was absolutely intentional. It was absolutely like one of the challenges is when you sit down to write, it's like, what am I going to write? And because I spent more than half a century reading science fiction, I knew what stories I wanted to read. And I was growing tired of the space opera that was really only military science fiction. And I thought, isn't there something that isn't there a space opera we can tell that is not about the military? Aren't there other stories that might be of interest that aren't, let's have a war,
Yeah.
the pew pew. We got to have aliens. We've got to have a war. We've got to have conflict. It's like, well, yeah, we got to have conflict, but we don't have to have a war. Um, and so I thought, well, what if we didn't send a military? It's hard to have a war if you don't have a military. So what if we sent freighters instead of frigates? What would that universe look like if it got explored and settled by corporate interests? What would that do to the people who were working there? And why is it always the captain? Why is it always the guy that's got the most agency, or the woman that's got the most agency, that's the lead in that story? It's like, well, yes, but that's what readers want. And it's like, mm, maybe, maybe not. That's what readers get.
Right.
They do they have a choice? Is there something else out there? And the answer is no, not really. So my goal is to put something else out there. And it's like, what's the definition of a hero? A hero is a person who gets up in the morning and does a dead end job for 40 years to keep food on the table and his kids fed. And you can't tell me that's not a hero.
Yeah.
And so it's like, all right, well, what kind of stories can I tell? What would that look like? How would that be shaped by having just sort of like things that real people would do? What would somebody do? What would be something real that somebody would be doing? And so mess deck attendant on an interstellar freighter, somebody has to do that job.
Yeah.
Can I tell a story about that and have it be intriguing? And it turns out that yes, I can, apparently.
Yeah.
So
And
virtually everything I write has that same sort of aesthetic to it. It's like I've got a problem with Ishmael Wong because now he's rich. He's the rich guy with agency and a captain, and it's like he's kind of outgrown his I won't say his usefulness, but he's sort of outgrown my original idea for him, which is kind of what I'm writing in other areas now.
yeah, you had a lot of love for science fiction.
Yeah.
And how is that, what kind of inspirations did you have writing science fiction that kind of led you to these, some of these stories? I mean, I know you said that there wasn't a lot that was necessarily the same, but what are some of the big science fiction things that you really loved?
Oh, I started with Heinlein juveniles back in the 50s. So a lot of those stories, I liked a lot of those stories. They kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities of science fiction, of novels, of reading. Uh, I my my aunt was a big reader, and she would stop by our house about once every other month with a doubled grocery bag full of paperbacks, and a lot of those were ace doubles.
Okay.
Ace double was a mass market size paperback, and on one it was called a double because it actually had two novels in it, two short novels, but it had two novels in it. And if you looked at the cover, you could read through till halfway, and then all the pages were reversed. So you turn the book over, and what was the back cover now becomes the front cover of the new book, and then you read to the middle of the book. And so every one of those books had two stories in it. And so a lot of those ace doubles were, Frederick Pohl and Isaac Asimov and all kinds of stuff. So I read. I read almost everything I could find, and I had a lot of that fed to me through my aunt's filter,
Yeah.
because the books were free, and I could read all summer on a pile of books from her. But I read, one summer I went through the complete works of William Makepeace Thackeray. All right. I read pretty much everything Dostoevsky ever wrote. Okay. Hated Ivanhoe. But so reading has always sort of been my go-to. And for science fiction, David Weber featured prominently recently. In the early days, it was all Simak, Stanislaw Lem, you name them. I read them. Bradbury. Um, I didn't want to grow up to be Ray Bradbury, but if I had to be one of them, it would be him.
Yeah.
But really, it was where are the holes in the continuum of possible stories? What are stories that I could think of that aren't out there now? And so, the idea that I would write the stories that I wanted to read but couldn't find.
Yeah.
A lot of authors write the stories they want to read, but they don't take that extra step to find what are the ones that I want to read that aren't there already.
Right.
And so you run into a lot of, I won't call them copycats or clones, but you run into a lot of stories that have this sort of same kind of attention to trope.
Yeah.
I never met a trope I couldn't bend. And so, finding a way to bend a trope and tell a story that's recognized in its niche, but doesn't exist in that niche yet,
Yeah.
is really my puzzle. It's really the intellectual challenge for me. I don't care about writing. I don't care about writing the great American novel, or even a great novel, or even really, well, a good novel is okay.
Yeah.
But I want to write the novel that some reader is going to pick up and go, cool, this is cool. And so hearing that from you was quite gratifying.
Yeah. When you look at how things have come along since then, as far as technology goes, how cool is it to see some of the advances in technology that kind of mirrors a lot of the science fiction of old, in modern day? Now, obviously, it's not exactly the same. We don't have flying cars and stuff like that, but I mean, there is definitely some technological stuff. Just a cell phone by itself is something straight out of the Jetsons, for crying out loud. Or talking to your doctor on a screen and having them do all their stuff like that. Like, how is that for you, who's been a big fan, to be able to see this happen as time progresses?
It's every once in a while I stop and think about it, and um, it's I was in on the beginning of the internet. I was 7th grade, 8th grade, and my math teacher um, was an ex-Navy intelligence guy who worked at Bletchley Park during World War II. And so he was tapped into all of this weird stuff all the time. And one night he took us on a field trip to a hotel in town in the grand city of Portland, Maine. And we worked with a teletype operation that linked us to the first hub of the internet through DARPA. And so watching it from whenever that was, I was 12 or 15, and seeing everything that's happened with the internet since then has been sort of wild. Seeing how it's related to science fiction as a whole. Somebody said, history is anything that happened before you were born. And so it's like if people talk about, well, I'm rotary dial age old, or I'm whatever age. I'm 48 states aged old. I'm airplane, but not space age.
Okay.
Quite often it strikes me when I used to travel all the time, and then I would go through an airport and think, this was a field. This wasn't an airport. This was a field when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And you think, in 50 years, there are whole industries have grown up. In 10 years, there are whole industries that have grown up. And so what does that look like if you extend that up 200, 300 years? And what does that do to people? Do people change in 300 years?
Yeah, no.
Do they do anything? Do they do anything different in 300 years? Do they wear different clothes? Maybe they wear different fabrics. I mean, this fabric didn't. I don't know that this fabric existed when I was a kid.
Right.
But do people change? I read not too long ago. This year, I'm reading a classic book a month. And so I read Tale of Genji, not this month, but last month. 1,000-year-old novel. And the people were just as miserable then. The story was pretty much, it could have been written last week.
Right.
What people did, people don't change much.
Yeah.
So telling stories set on an interstellar freighter, there isn't really much difference in telling stories on a sail-powered clipper ship.
Yeah.
It's, the buttons you push, the ropes you pull, that's the only thing that changes. What the people have to live with, what the people have to do, the stories that are going to resonate with the reader are going to be the same stories.
Yeah.
Just the setting changes.
What was the reason for like a setting change? Because you did the Solar Clipper series for quite a while, and then you did the Tanith Fairport, which is isn't that a little bit more like fantasy than science fiction?
Oh yeah, there's a story that goes with that.
All right.
In 2009, for NaNoWriMo, Mur Lafferty challenged me to do NaNoWriMo in half a month. Because in those days, I had a reputation for writing 10,000 words a day for a few weeks at a time. And at 10,000 words a day, it doesn't take long to get to 100,000 words.
Right.
So I was writing a lot, and I had a reputation for writing fast. And so Mur Lafferty challenged me to do NaNoWriMo in half a month. So 50,000 words in 2 weeks instead of a month, or 100,000 words for the month. And she challenged me on Twitter back in the
Okay.
days when you could actually talk to people on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so she challenged me on Twitter, and we went back and forth, and it's like, oh no, please don't make me do that. I can't possibly, I wouldn't ever, how could I possibly accept such a challenge? And then she'd come back to me and she'd goad me a little bit more, and finally I reluctantly gave in and said, all right, I accept your challenge. I will write 50,000 words in 2 weeks, which is, okay, fine. And then people started piling on. Well, we know you can write science fiction that fast. Can you write fantasy? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
And then the next challenge was, okay, it can't be a man. Your main character has to be a woman in fantasy, 50,000 words in 2 weeks. And this is mid-October. So I've got about 2 weeks to come up with something.
Okay.
And so I came up with 10 at Fairport and said, all right, it's not going to be a girl leaving the farm, getting puberty and magic and can't go
Right.
home again, but saves the world from the ultimate evil. All right, how do I twist those tropes?
Right. Right.
How do I approach this in a different way? Well, okay, what if it's not puberty? What if it's menopause? When you get magic? And what if it's not trying to get home again, but trying to find a home? And what if you're not trying to save the world from the ultimate evil, but you're trying to figure out whether or not you're going insane? And so that was Tennis Fairport. And I only expected that to be one book, but when I got to the end of what became Ravenwood, it was like obvious it was going to be at least a trilogy.
Yeah.
And so I started writing fantasy. I wrote, I've written 4 fantasies now, five counting the one I did with my daughter.
Yeah. And
Uh,
do you enjoy the little break from sci-fi to do those?
oh yeah, oh yeah. Wizards Butler was complete. I needed to write something else. Um, I'd written, I don't know, 6 or 7, at least 6. I think actually 7 novels in the deep dark, all in a row. And it's like, I need to write something else. I like
Right.
steak, but having steak 17 times in a row is not exactly, give me some soup. I
Well,
mean,
let's talk about the Wizards Butler because it may not be filet mignon, but it might be lobster and crab or something else. Because to let you know, I came across a Wizards Butler probably 2021, and I don't remember if it was somebody suggested it to me online, like on a Facebook or something, or if it was just Audible said, we suggest this based on other things that you've been doing.
yeah,
And I sat down, and to this day, I go, this is the best. This is one of my favorite stories of the last probably 10 years that I've read and or listened to. In my case, it was listened to just because it was so fresh and it was so different, and I was so intrigued by the characters, and I wasn't sure, is this an urban fantasy or is this a mystery? Is this,
yeah.
what is the story? What is it? And I've probably listened to it probably 4 or 5 times since then. Just, anytime I'm like, I've got some free time, I don't have a book I need to do, I don't have an author coming on the show anytime super soon that I haven't already listened to their stuff. What are you going to listen to? Wizards Butler. And
It
so,
was, yeah, it was a labor of love. It was like, I need to write something else. And so I asked the fans of what they thought I should write that wasn't Ishmael Wong, that wasn't science fiction, that wasn't set in the same golden age place. And of course, 90% of them were more Ishmael Wong in the golden age. Um, a bunch of them were, really? I don't know. And then the last one, the guy caught me on Facebook on chat and said, what if it was, Mickey and Fantasia, the Wizard's Apprentice? What if it was Mickey, but he wasn't magical, so he couldn't get in trouble. And I said, what, like the Wizard's Butler? And he said, yeah. And I went, what the hell? How? What? And it was done. I mean, I was hooked at that point. I couldn't get beyond the idea of what would a Wizard's Butler be?
Yeah.
It's like, is the wizard like stone tower, is sparkling robes and a pointy hat wizard? Is he like Harry Dresden wizard? Is he what? I mean, why would he need a butler? And so it's like, all right, why does anybody need a butler? They need a butler to manage their household. Why do they need to manage their household? Well, they're too busy doing whatever it is that they're doing, which
Yeah.
means they're probably rich and they can afford to pay a butler. And would they hire a butler who wasn't magical?
Right.
Are there magical butlers? I don't know. Could be, but the task was to write one that wasn't magical. And so it's like, okay, well, I did a little brainstorm with a friend, and we determined that what the wizard's problem was basically just. And then I sat down one day and said, all right, we're going to write the Wizard's Butler. And it just took off.
Yeah.
I ripped it out in, I think, 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And it just flowed out. And it was so much fun to write. And because I didn't have to worry about continuity or what they said before, or what happened 5 books before that one, or is there another character that this guy's supposed to know but doesn't? And it's like, no, this is a whole new universe. I don't have to worry about continuity. I don't have to worry about previous books. I just have to worry about what did he do
Yeah.
before the book started. And so my process of what just happened so that I can write
Right.
what happens next. And what just happened was that he needed a job and he got an ad. And so he showed up at the front door.
Yeah.
And Naomi Patchett happened.
What kind of research did you have to do for that, or was a lot of this information? Because like some of the books, like the On Cooking book, is a real book. Like it's a real
That's a
cooking
real
book
book,
that's
yeah.
really out there. Like was that
That's
something that
really out
just
there.
came across in like were you researching it, or did you just
Yeah.
have your
No,
own
I did.
copy? Or
No, I don't have my own copy, but I've been a bit of a foodie. And so I knew there was a book. I just didn't know what it was called. The Butler handbook that he looked at, that's actual book. I have a copy of that one.
oh, okay.
Um, I looked up like butler schools, and I
Mm-hmm.
looked up what butlers do and how butlers work, because the sort of upstairs downstairs Downton Abbey TV movie image of butlers isn't necessarily too far off the mark, but it's also
Right.
not very close to the mark either.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that butlers do that is kind of like, yeah. And mostly it's management. But in a household where the only staff is you,
Yeah.
my challenge is to try to figure out, okay, well, what would the butler do if you're the only one? Well, you're the butler, you're the cook, you're the
Yeah.
chauffeur,
Security, valet,
security, you're the valet. You got to
planner,
do a bunch of
scheduler.
scheduler. You got to do a bunch of stuff, and in the meantime, curmudgeonly old Joseph Perry Shackelford is sitting upstairs, slowly leaking his brain out of his ears. And how do we deal with that? And
Right.
then Naomi Patchett is always there poking at him, like, and then Fidelia Neckett shows up at the front door, and it's like, oh yeah, 90-year-old mountain climber.
Yeah. Like I said, I just love the way that it's kind of a mystery throughout, and just as one question gets answered, you have three more mysteries to solve as
Yeah.
the story progresses. Was the mystery-ish element intentional, or was that just a happenstance?
Well, it's like I didn't want to solve it too soon, but one of the beauties of being a writer is that you have a time machine. And so you write it along, you write it along, you write it along, you write it along, you get to the end. And then you think, I need to have this thing here way back there. So I just open the word processing file and put it in.
Yeah.
I can go back in time in the story and have it fit. And so the first pass through was actually pretty clean. I was sort of surprised how well it came together right off the bat. But I mean, starting with the guys in EMT, that's a clue.
Yeah.
Or was an EMT, that's a clue.
Yeah.
Or that he was in Afghanistan, that's a clue.
Right.
So he had to have a reasonable background to do the things that he was going to do. And from that point forward, because I really only knew one thing that was going to happen near the end of the book, everything else just sort of fell apart. Everything else just sort of like, okay, well, what happens next? What happens next? What happens next? Well, I got to have something happen next, and I'm not gonna throw in a dead body.
Right.
So, what would the butler have to do next? And what would Shackelford need the butler to do next, even if Shackelford doesn't know enough to ask him for it?
Right.
What would, who is this Otello Bruna person, and why does what happened? What happened to Shackelford's sister?
Right.
And he's got a nephew out there somewhere. What happened to him? And so there's all of these loose ends now that I can now explore, but I just sort of threw them in there just for fun. And before I knew it, I had sort of a fantastical mystery tour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and having those loose ends gives you something to do down the road for future possible books as well.
Well, yeah, now I've got to write a sequel. It was supposed to be a one-off, but now I've got to write a sequel. Podium's waiting for the Wizard's cat.
I'm very excited about that. Okay, you might completely say I can't tell you anything if you can't tell me. Is this cat new, or is it like a metaphor, or is it something that's been there the whole time and we just don't realize it?
Oh no, cat's new. This is a new. The cat's new.
Okay.
The cat's new. It was one of those weird things. It's like, okay, you got to write a sequel to the Wizards Butler. What else doesn't a wizard need?
Okay. Fair enough.
A wizard doesn't need a cat. And there's a running gag on the Golden Age group about spitting on the deck and calling the cat rude names. And
right.
What do we have a cat? And so the Facebook group actually has a cat, and the cat is lobbying to have a cat brought into the story.
Okay.
And so the wizard's cat is sort of like a nod to the running gag about not having a cat on board.
That's great.
But really it was like, what else doesn't a wizard need? Well,
yeah.
It doesn't need a cat. And then with somebody said, what kind of problems would a cat, wouldn't a cat bother the pixies? Why would a cat bother the pixies? Why would the cat bother the pixies? Okay, that's something I can work with.
Yeah.
That's something I can work with. And I've written like 150,000 words of this book, but none of them go together. So I'm gonna toss those out and start again.
Okay.
But as soon as I get done with the formatting of this next Ishmael Wong book, I'm going to dig into the Wizard's cat. I've had a lot of time to think about the Wizard's cat. And I've got some ideas I'm kind of looking forward to get to.
You have 3 new books coming out, right?
Yep.
In the Solar Clipper show series,
Ishmael Wong and Company.
Do you have an idea of dates or rough months or anything like that you're hoping that you can say?
In theory, I'm going to have a cover for the first book, School's Out. I'm going to have a cover for that mid-month, May.
Okay.
I'm hoping I'm going to have a cover mid-month, May, and I'm hoping I'm going to have the book formatted and ready to go when the cover drops. So when the cover drops, so will the book.
Okay. So we're hoping, within the next couple of months before the end of the year for sure.
Oh yeah, certainly within the next couple of months. The covers are supposed to drop May, June, July. I'm supposed to get them from the artist in May, June, and July. Um, the second book is already with the editor. The third book I'm just finishing now. That will go to the editor probably next week. I've already reserved the editing slot, so I'm just waiting for her availability to get the books done.
Okay.
She takes about a month. So, she's finished book one. She's got book two. She's probably not going to be able to start book two for another week or two. And a month later, I'll have book two back from her, and I still won't have, according to the schedule, I still won't have a cover for it. So that's going to have to wait for a bit. But I would not be surprised to see June, July, August. I hesitate to give dates because
Right.
dates
You never know.
This sort of magical thing that if I give you a date, that's the date it won't happen.
Right.
And so I try not to give dates, but it would not surprise me to see something happen like June, July, August.
Okay.
At least for the text versions. The audiobooks are going to take
A little bit
more
longer.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't have any control over them.
Yeah.
So
do you listen to your own audiobooks at all? Or are you just like, I wrote it, I'm done?
No, I wrote it, I'm done.
Okay.
I don't. I've listened to snippets of it here and there. I got tired of hearing my own stories in my own voice when I was trying to do the editing.
Right.
When
That's
I was
why I
doing
was
the
kind of curious,
podcasting.
because you had read it for so long. I was wondering if you like didn't want to hear somebody else voicing it, and if you had issues with that or not, or because I know
No,
I would. If I were to do something, I'd be like, gosh, I can't. Like if somebody else were to do, like if I were sick and somebody else were to do this show, I don't know if I could watch it because I'd be so nitpicky about it.
Oh, it's more a factor of time.
Okay.
It's like I don't have time for audio anymore. Um, when if I back when I had an hour long commute each way, I had time for audio.
Yeah.
I don't have time for audio now. If I'm not doing something on the computer, I'm reading, and if I'm reading, don't need I can use my eyes. I don't need to have it be my ears.
Yeah.
And so if I can read with my eyes, I read a lot faster than most people narrate,
Yep.
which
I hear that quite
is
a bit actually.
good and bad. But I read like 900 words a minute, and most narrators only get 5,000 words in a half an hour.
Yeah, because your brain goes faster than a mouth can.
Yeah, my brain goes faster than my fingers can type. So typing speed is not my bottleneck.
You also have a podcast, Talking on My
I
Morning
do.
Walk.
Yeah.
How are you enjoying doing that?
Oh, it's good to be back.
Yeah.
It's one of those low trauma things. I don't have to think about it very much. The 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 deal with it is I'm going to talk about what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Quite often it's just me walking along. Somebody talked about the episodes that are the best of Nathan's boots. And the only thing you hear is me walking on the sidewalk.
Yeah. And that can be found on your website for those that are listening,
yep.
which we'll talk about here, and we'll plug that website address here in a bit. What was the inspiration of doing the Talking on My Morning Walk? Was it just you had a love for podcasting and you wanted to do this, or
no, it was it actually has to do with where I want to spend my time, and I want to spend my time writing new stories. I don't want to spend my time writing blog posts or sending newsletters. The common wisdom, oh, well, you need to send a newsletter every week, or you need to write 3 blog posts every week, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. And I'm like, no, actually what I've got to do is write a new book.
Yeah.
The bread gets buttered on a new book. And so I have to write a new story. That's why I don't narrate anymore. I don't have time to narrate anymore. I don't have time to listen, let alone read,
right.
To narrate and do all of the production work that goes along with narration. And so I stopped writing blog posts. I write a blog post once a month. Every month on the 1st, I publish a blog post, and it's just real plain. This is what I'm doing. This is what I read. This is what I'm going to do next. Have a nice week. Have a nice month. I'll talk to you next month. And then the newsletter I send out once a month on the 15th. So people who want to follow what I'm doing can get 1 or 2 updates a month, depending on how hardcore they get. The blog has an RSS feed, so you can get it on RSS. But so does the podcast. You can get that on RSS. The newsletter is a newsletter. You have to sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah.
But then I had people saying, well, I want to know what you're doing today. I want to know what you're doing this week. I want to know. And I'm like, well, I don't want to take the time. But I was walking, I need to walk for my health. And so I was walking 2 miles a day. And so I thought, well, all right. I had a recorder in my pocket with my phone, and I only needed a microphone. And I didn't really need a microphone because I had, the wired headset thing.
Yeah.
And so I started walking for a mile and talking for a mile. And so I pick it up. There's a particular stop sign that's halfway around the loop, and I start talking and record what I talk. And when I get home, I publish it. I occasionally have to ship out a piece or two. And the other day, I inadvertently recorded a neighbor. We had a conversation that I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't get permission to record them, so I just clipped it out.
Yeah.
But I've actually had a couple of guests who as a podcaster, you probably get the emails from people who would love to be a guest on your show.
Yeah.
And I always write back and say I would be happy to have them be a guest on my show, but you have to understand they have to come to Greeley, and they have to be willing to walk 2 miles at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm always happy to have that. Dave Robinson, who I've known for years now, came out. He's been a guest on my show a couple of times.
Okay.
And the first time he came in, and we walked through, we did the walk, we did the talk, and we went around the corner, and he got back and he said, this is pretty cool. What would you think if I started one? I said, go for it. And so he has his own podcast now, North Pond Monologues, and he's no longer living in Chicago. He's no longer walking around the North Pond in Chicago.
Yeah.
He's in Portland now, but it's still the North Pond Monologues, and so he's still doing it. He's at like episode 700 or something.
Nice.
And he walks most days. It's like I try to walk most days. Ideally, I would walk every day. Some days the recording fails. Some days the weather's crap. Some days, last year, some days I was too sick.
Yeah.
But some days it's too cold. Some days it's too hot. I don't get out early enough in the morning, and it's too hot. I don't walk when it's more than 70. I don't walk when it's below 10. It's outdoors. I'm old. I'm not gonna risk my life for a walk in the park.
Yeah, that's understandable for sure.
But I do the podcast, but it's mostly just in a lot of ways it's like morning pages. It's sort of like a journal. What am I thinking about? What am I doing? I talk about what I'm writing. I try not to put spoilers out.
Yeah.
It's like you can talk about maybe what you're thinking, but you can't talk about what you're writing too closely.
Right.
But it's like, well, maybe we do this, or maybe we could do that. And, oh, look, geese. Geese are my favorite. I know we get a lot of geese here at certain times of the year, and having the big flock of geese fly overhead honking the way, it's like, yeah, okay, this is cool. I think the big thing this month is the lilacs are beginning to bud.
Yeah.
Scintillating stuff.
Well, this time of year, not this time of the year for me, but in a couple weeks when the lilacs start to bloom, that's when I go looking for morel mushrooms in the woods. So yeah, I definitely understand you on that, and the going out and getting some exercise. I need to do more of that myself personally, but I don't. So I will take inspiration from you and get out there and do a little bit more of that. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being on the show. You are on Facebook at /Nathan o.lowell. You're on
Yeah, I think
Instagram
so.
at nathan.lowell and your
Yeah.
website, nathanlowell.com.
Yep.
So everybody who's listening to the podcast, you can go to those sites. You can check out the Talking on My Morning Walk there. You can check out all of his stuff. He's got a pretty great website with all kinds of great information on there and
Thanks.
links all over the place. So make sure to go and check it out. Go and check out the books. His new books are coming out here, hopefully in the next couple months. So make sure you go and check those out. And if you have never heard of some of them, go back and check out the backlog. Check them all out, whether you get them on audiobook, podiobook, or physical copies or e-reads. Go and check out Nathan Lowell stuff. You won't be disappointed. I promise you. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, May 8th, we're going to be joined by Sovereignty Games community manager Danny Efforts. Sovereignty is one of the leading companies bringing you your favorite tabletop board games into the digital world. She's going to talk to us about the company and the future of digital games, as well as the companies that they're working with. That podcast is going to be available to listen to May 9th, but of course you can come in and join the Q&A sessions and watch it live on May 8th. May 22nd, joining us is the creator of the tabletop role-playing game Mutants and Masterminds. It's a superhero RPG if you've never heard of it. Steve Kinson. He's also the author of many tie-in novels for games like Shadowrun, Crimson Skies, Mech Warriors, and more. Not to mention, he also has worked for FASA, D&D, and a ton of other companies. So that podcast is going to be available May 23rd. So please go ahead, rate and review. It's the least we can ask. It helps us and it helps our guests. So, for Nathan Lowell, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.